Welcome back, guests. Good to see you, Geoff.
Good to see you, Kate.
Good to see you, Mike.
Always great to see you, Kate.
Always, always, no matter which coast I'm on, right?
That's right. Where exactly are you today?
I'm in Halifax. I'm recording live Hotel Pacifico from the Atlantic coast.
Hmm.
Yeah, a little bit
You seeing
That's a
different.
first.
what do they call it? The blue nose? Have you seen the blue nose sailing around in Halifax at all?
I haven't yet. I got in late last night and I've been in a conference center all day, but hopefully that will happen. And I'm staying with my family for the weekend. We're gonna spend a little time in Nova Scotia. So
Oh, I love it.
yeah.
So it's Hotel Atlantico.
It is. It is today. It is
Mhm.
today. And yeah, for more reasons than one, but I'll get to that in a second because we've got some good stuff for the strategy suite again today. The king has landed on our shores and proclaimed the true north strong and free. We've got a clipping of the week this week from Nancy McDonald in the Globe and Mail on the drug crisis in Victoria. We'll talk more about that. It's the final week of the legislative session. And we've got one BC premier now pushing Metro Vancouver amalgamation. I don't know if they've been listening in our chats on that topic, but we'll get to that too. But first, our guest today is Stewart Muir. Stewart is the president and CEO of ResourceWorks, a nonprofit group that aims to deliver thoughtful, fact-based content to help Canadians engage on issues concerning natural resource development and its impacts on our economy, reconciliation, environment, and communities. He's a journalist by trade, serving as deputy managing editor of the Vancouver Sun for over a decade. He is host of the Power Struggle podcast, which focuses on the energy landscape, and he's co-founder and board member of Tursa Earth, a BC company aiming to clean up mine tailings. Welcome to Hotel Pacifico, Stewart.
Thanks, Kate.
We
Do
cover
you,
everything? You
want to
anything we
add anything else
miss?
in there? What's your astrological sign? Yeah, okay.
Fully covered.
Okay, good. Well, kick us off though a bit, Stewart. There is a lot to cover there, but tell us about ResourceWorks.
Yeah, we came about at a time when there were all of these huge mega projects coming through in the early stages of permitting over a decade ago in Vancouver and BC. And when you think back, there's been nothing like that on this scale anywhere else in Canada, at least in the modern era of four mega projects. BC Hydro, the Trans Mountain Pipeline, the Coastal GasLink Pipeline, and the LNG Canada. And they're all now finishing. And the journey between a dozen years ago and now, for all of those who were on the scene, was fraught with all kinds of tension, conflict, cost overruns, politics, elections that happened. And, I feel like a survivor. And I'm sure everyone feels that way because we were all here and we've learned a lot. And hopefully, as the next cycle of things being built comes along through the work I've done at ResourceWorks, we've learned a little bit. So that's my thought on 2025.
Stuart, how do
Stuart,
you pay the rent? I mean, you've been out there as an important influencer on a lot of these issues for, I think, a decade now. I've been seeing you out there. How do you make it work?
Yeah, when we started, there were enough, interested parties, companies, that we were able to go around with rice bowl in hand and get together sufficient interest. We realized that the business model necessitated a level of transparency. So our not-for-profit model as a not-for-profit BC society is what we adopted. Volunteer board, and they've guided us through these years. We've developed other things, though. We launched after the DREPA law came in the fall of 2019. We decided to get into the events business, so we launched the Indigenous Partnerships Success Showcase. We're going to have the 6th annual event later this year, and it's become quite a thing. We're doing other events. We're working outside of BC and the rest of Canada because I think our learnings have become more translatable. We're not really a think tank. I was in Mumbai and I saw this sign on the side of the road, action tank, describing something or other. I think we're an action tank because we're not ruminating on big ideas. We don't have PhDs toiling away. We're really looking to be a transmission from big ideas to action that affects good outcomes that are inclusive. So that's what we've tried to do.
resource industries, over the years have been more in the dunk tank in BC, and they haven't done a great job telling their story historically. I think the forest industry might be a poster child for that in terms of the War of the Woods and how environmentalists got the upper hand for a while. What's the state of the storytelling for the resource industries now? Because I mean, it's hard to win hearts and minds for a business,
Yeah, Mike, I think we're
especially
at
in a growing urban area here that may feel somewhat detached from a resource economy now.
Well, coming out of the federal election, it feels like there's a moment of opportunity. There's never been higher support for projects like pipelines in a general sense. Of course, when you go from the general to the specific, it gets gnarly. But we're seeing, I think, an opportunity here as a country, as a province in BC, to be able to bring forward quality ideas. And at the same time, we've gone through the process where over the last decade, climate change has become front of mind for everybody. It's not necessarily in recent polling the highest concern, but it's something everyone knows about. And First Nations rights, reconciliation, I think, have also zoomed up there. So these are factors that a decade or two ago were not on the radar.
Well, the other shift, yeah, go ahead.
Now, forestry, you mentioned that, Mike, in particular, I think has gone through so much change. The War in the Woods version 1 in the 1990s, and then version 2 during COVID, where we had explosions like in Fairy Creek, where that became a kind of emblem of something. And it led to a lot of departures of companies. It led to a lot of changes of regulation. It's now very difficult to be in the forest products business in BC, but those who are here are making money. I mean, businesses survive and make a profit no matter what the conditions are, but we've had a lot of exits as companies have said, you know what, it's just not going to work for us in BC, which is really unfortunate for communities.
So another shift we're seeing right now is at the federal level, right? And I want to talk about, the new Federal Energy and Natural Resources Minister, Tim Hodgson, speaking at the Calgary Chamber of Commerce recently. And signaling what looks like a pivot, I'm going to say, talking about an economy defined by delivery, not delay. I'll directly quote him here. Every barrel of responsibly produced Canadian oil and every kilowatt of clean Canadian power can displace less clean, riskier energy elsewhere in the world. What are you picking up on out of this about what this signals about the new Carney government and how they'll be different?
Yeah, I think when you have 38 CEOs getting together, writing a letter to the Prime Minister, as they did after the election, to say, look, we're facing dire circumstances. We need your help. This is $500 billion worth of businesses. I haven't seen that before, where you've got the kind of upswell from industry. Things like the emissions cap, which in Alberta is referred to as a production cap because it will reduce the amount of oil produced and shipped. And the Impact Assessment Act, also very problematic for Calgary. So they're looking for some very specific decisions, which neither the Prime Minister nor Tim Hodgson have talked about allowing to happen. So even though it was a very feel-good room when Minister Hodgson showed up to deliver messages like you've stated, Kate, and there was a feeling of optimism, it's now about, okay, what are you going to do with this?
Guess? Last week we spoke about how today's gold rush is actually a copper rush. Today's green energy and tech sectors require a lot of copper. For things like electric vehicles, 5G technology, and renewable energy, copper is in high demand, and so prices have skyrocketed. And our presenting sponsor, Telus, has a ton of the ever more precious metal because they've spent the last several years replacing legacy copper telephone lines with their more sustainable, durable, and lightning-fast pure fiber. But here's the inspiring part. Telus is taking those copper recycling proceeds and pouring them back into our communities, especially here in BC. Through their Mobility for Good program, they're providing free or discounted smartphones and mobile plans to those who need it most. Low-income seniors and families, youth leaving government care, Indigenous women at risk of violence, and government-assisted refugees. And they're unlocking valuable urban real estate by redeveloping their large decommissioned copper sites through an initiative called Telus Living, which is helping address the increasing demand for affordable housing in Canada. 3 projects are already underway in BC, with more to come across the country, producing innovative, purpose-built rental housing. Now that's a win for the hometown teen and for all of us.
Stewart, I've always struggled partly with the resistance to the emissions cap. because it struck me as a way of signaling that production would continue, but the negative impacts, the harms of production, would be capped and ultimately reduced through innovation or carbon capture and storage and that kind of thing. And we could see that possibility too in the Northeast gas fields if we electrified the production of gas and at the wellhead and also reduced methane emissions. Those two strategies both have a cost, of course, but we'd have by far the cleanest gas in the world. It's very clean when it comes out of the ground, but it would be very, very clean. Why is the emissions cap seen as a production cap? Couldn't it be an innovation spur or something like that?
I think that's how you would want it to be seen. But even the parliamentary budget officer came out before the election with a report saying, yeah, it's a production cap. So I think there's a level of honesty that's missing here in terms of what it actually does. The feeling in Calgary is, yeah, we are innovating. We're doing, 100 little things that add up to a lot. We're also looking to do some big things like, say, the Pathways Initiative for the oil sands to pipe CO2 into
That's the
geological
carbon
storage.
capture and storage piece. Yeah.
Yeah. But when BC came out with its idea for its own emissions cap, a kind of belt and suspenders approach, we don't trust the feds to have an emissions cap, so we'll have one too. I think that looks to the industry like a an approach that isn't really about the emissions problem as it is about maybe curbing an industry that isn't liked. That's how Calgary feels about it. I'm not saying that's the reason. So I think there's a lack of dialogue in this to settle on some of the terms. I mean, it's very clear what the PBO said about production, and if you look at the forecast to the mid 2030s, you will see this tailing off of oil sands production. And in the minds of the Calgary executive suite, what that means is it's an opportunity for heavy oil from other countries that compete with Canada, like Venezuela, like Iraq. So because of this emissions cap, we're actually going to have this product from other countries that I don't think are shining examples of democratic values to outcompete Canada. I think we deserve to have a public conversation about that. But every time it comes up, they go to their corners, production cap, emissions cap, and it's just.
I'll just do a quick follow-up though, because when I was working on this, so we know that in some respects, I think regrettably, the whole discussion of climate change is sunsetting. But where various sectors were being asked to reduce their emissions, a lot were stepping up, a lot of them who did way less emitting than the oil and gas sector. So a decision to allow emissions to continue to rise in the oil and gas sector was basically taking out of the pockets of those collaborative industries, the ones that were supportive of the initiative, to support the oil industry. And there was a debate, I think, that needed to happen in the business community about the fairness of that. But we've got a lot of other topics to cover, so I won't get mired on emissions cap.
I think we have become cushioned a little bit by this idea that you can reduce industry emissions. But what's happened is, and you can see it in the Clean BC recent audit, that we're simply deindustrializing here, sending those industrial activities to other countries, and then going on to buy the goods into Canada, just as we are exporting natural gas from British Columbia to Washington State, where it's turned into electricity, and we buy that back here, and there's no climate points off for BC. So I think there are some quite concerning issues in this that we're not really being fully transparent on, and we should be.
Mm-hmm.
Stewart, I don't even know what a hewer of wood is, but there's always lots of talk about how Canadians are hewers of wood and drawers of water. But we get very attached to the resource economy, but shouldn't we be diversifying more? High tech is the future, et cetera, et cetera. How does one present the resource economy to an urban audience nowadays in a way that makes it look as an appealing part of building a country around it?
Well, just try to build an NVIDIA chip without the natural resource inputs. You're not going to be able to do that. We're going to see the global electrification agenda send copper prices to levels that are unimaginable, and the quantities needed are virtually unobtainable. How we do this is very difficult to understand. So all of these dreams of a green technology-driven future are completely dependent on the material inputs to build equipment, to fuel innovation. And I think there is a natural tendency to avoid the difficult stuff, and it is one of the difficult conversations. But I think another thing that concerns me more is the sort of culture cringe that Canadians have. I think maybe in some pockets they're having less of it about, oh, we are these hewers of wood and haulers of water, and that's a bad thing. Well, actually, at the end of the day, you can do very well as a country that has got these natural resources that nobody can take away, that cannot be sent to another country like a factory can. Those jobs are here. They have a very valuable supply chain. We have all the expertise around that. It's really one of the best things about Canada, but we have a little bit of trouble feeling good about it, which I think needs to change.
And why is that?
I think it's a combination of, through the last decade, 12 years, particularly in BC, you've had the culture wars, and there's been polarizations. People have gone to their positions, and it's created some damage. There needs to be some healing. I think that's one of the learnings out of this conflict, where you've got the pitch battle that, oh, if you have a tanker, it will inevitably spill bitumen onto the beaches and destroy tourism. And if you think that's a good idea, you must be a very bad person. And then there's other ways around it. I think the climate denialism, which you see, what we're seeing out of the U.S. right now with entire climate policies being ditched, is obviously a big concern. In large part because that's the opportunity for innovation in resources, when you've got the impetus through carbon pricing, through the pull to get into carbon capture technologies. That's a great business to be in. That makes sense. But unfortunately, I think it's in very clear danger right now.
Well, related to that, I think we've had such an interesting discussion as a country about our relationship to energy and resource development. And Trump sort of provided this moment where I'm going to say I felt like something had shifted. I felt like there was some sort of different, a notion of sort of our own sovereignty and being able to sort of protect our own interests became salient in a way certainly it hadn't, which sort of pointed us more towards maybe an increased appetite for more resource development close to home. But I'm going to point to the back and forth with Daniel Smith and David Eby recently as like, I don't know, maybe I was getting ahead of everybody. And just in particular, I want to say, David Eby sort of poured water on the idea of whether there be openness from BC to a pipeline, and Daniel Smith then said he was actually pouring gasoline on the separation discussion. So what's the role of the premiers in working together on this and helping sort of this moment that maybe happened where we sort of understood resource development a bit differently, helping that stick and be real? And actually, let me ask you too, do you think that's going to stick around, or are we back, or we slid back to where we were before?
Well, only last summer I was in a room where Premier Smith waxed on about the wonderful work of Premier Eby and BC in hydrogen, green hydrogen. That was before it became known that the 7 hydrogen projects in BC were all either paused or canceled. But she was very, very generous in her public praise of this work. And I know that behind the scenes, there was a lot of constructive stuff going on, transportation corridors and all that. But then suddenly this very different tone. And I think one of the kind of basic rules of conducting interprovincial affairs is that when it comes to major projects, particularly ones that cross borders, you kind of give some space to your neighbors and your fellow premiers. So I think when Premier Smith began speaking of Prince Rupert, I think it left a lot of people puzzled as to why that is. Enbridge, which was the Northern Gateway pipeline proponent years ago, immediately said, "Hey, we're not involved in this. We're not looking there at all. We have lots of other things on our plate." What is going on in Prince Rupert, though, in terms of getting energy to market, is quite exciting, which is the propane market, getting those liquids that come from BC natural gas, which is very liquid rich. So it's got 2 uses, the gas for LNG and then liquids for propane and stuff like that. Well, they supply about 1/4 of all the propane used in Japan. It's an enormous opportunity. Then Trigon Terminals, which used to be Ridley, is also growing that. So there's going to be an enormous amount. If I was talking about Prince Rupert and I was in Alberta or BC, I'd be talking about the propane opportunity, because the oil thing right now is just going to get people annoyed, and there's no project to talk about. So I kind of feel that forced Premier Eby to come out and say, look, I don't know what you're talking about. No discussion here. And it seems to have sort of, trailed off. I hope it stays that way, because there's really no worthwhile conversation at the moment in that. There's lots of other things with getting oil to market we should be talking about, but the northern route right now is a puzzle to be solved.
So you're in the camp of, yeah, and you're in the camp of, that was just a moment. That was sort of an odd exchange between two premiers, and we are this sort of new state where we think of energy as sort of a national sovereignty issue is here to stay.
Yeah, I think there's a 6 to 12-month window, given what the Prime Minister has accomplished and the minister he's put in place for energy, to tell Canadians whether they have a plan to execute on these lofty promises they've given out in Calgary and elsewhere. And it's quite ambitious. I don't think the minister has quite yet got his head around what he needs to do. His speech sounded great, but when he went off script, he was kind of all over the place. I'm sure that with his qualifications and accomplishments, he has the capacity to accomplish what's possible here. And there's a lot of things that the engineers can figure out to expand the capacity of things that you don't realize are possible until they suddenly come up with things. I mean, even oil by rail, I wouldn't be surprised if there's more potential for that, not necessarily in BC, but in other places. That's always there, but pipelines too.
Stewart, the Bill 15 debates continues to rage on this week. I mean, the government's intention obviously is to try to spur projects, except for natural gas not being part of that, but mining particularly is the belle of the ball these days. What's on your list, say your top three, for if you were to, Premier was sitting on this Zoom call today, what are the three things you think they should be doing to get the result they're looking for to expedite projects and spur on economic development?
I think it's going to be really important to this government that they get progress on the listed projects they've got, those wind farms, solar, the mines, which are mainly extensions, revivals, and then there are LNG projects on that list too. But get some progress with that, because I think it was a shrewd idea to take the approach that, okay, we're going to create this list, we're going to create conditions where we can get progress there. But it doesn't mean that there aren't other big things that also will have a big impact. And the thing about the wind farms, and I hope they succeed. I was recently out at Dawson Creek at the Bear Mountain Wind Park. We were able to go right up there and check it out. It's wonderful. BC's got all this wind resource. We can, should, and must develop it. What it won't do if we develop all of those wind farms, though, is create anything we can export to foreign countries that aren't the U.S. so that we can pay for the bananas and iPhones and oranges that we love to consume. So, we need to have trade, and electricity won't do it. What it can do is create the ability to make LNG greener, which is great. We want that. So I think if we're staying in that space, we're going to miss out on the window that is open for more LNG development. That's what the world wants. It's got the highest value. It's the thing we are best suited to do, and we can do, and we have a good track record. We've got wood fiber, we've got LNG Canada almost ready to ship in a few days. We've got the Cedar LNG, Sea Sims LNG. That's indicative of a lot of interest, and also there's a lot more interest.
But it seems like the government here, the NDP government, has said it's in favor of another gas pipeline. The Sea Sims project was put into the EA process, and now we see it's really on the Enbridge alignment that the second gas line would go, as I understand it. And we're just about to commission phase one of LNG
not the
Canada.
Enbridge alignment.
No, it's a different one. Okay,
it's the other one. Yeah,
three pipelines, three alignments. This was an energy corridor thing. I never understood why we didn't do more in one corridor. But anyway, the question for Stewart is, how have you seen the Indigenous issue evolve? I mean, in a lot of the controversies we hear, people are critical of Indigenous engagement and consultation, and others, Indigenous First Nations, are very much part of the equation and contributing equity or providing political support and getting equity. How has that evolved? Has the DRIPA process, the UN Declaration of Rights of Indigenous People, been a gain or a setback? How do you see it?
Well, it's a completely different scene than it was a decade ago when we
Right.
started these major projects. At that time, it was regarded as a great thing if a benefits agreement could be signed and then some form of payment is given to the nation that signed it during the life or at the outset of the project, and the benefits flow. But that began to be seen more as a handout, and there is a a lot of hesitation about the culture that has come from dependency. And so at this stage in the game, it's about equity. It's about the pride of ownership, being able to make choices to invest in some cases where there's dollars from a treaty settlement or business revenues that a nation has, to be in the driver's seat by actually owning. And the other thing that's changed is I have seen a whole generation of capable leaders, the MBAs, the lawyers, all the professionals who are First Nations coming to maturity, and now really are the ones who, when they walk in a room, just everything stops because it's known that they have got not only the competencies, but they've got the authority that comes with their nation. So that's completely different. And the change now is that people are looking for deals. First Nations are looking for deals. Companies are looking for deals. The recent Enbridge announcement to hive off a portion of ownership of a pipeline system to First Nations, a kind of syndicate of First Nations, I think is emblematic of what the future is going to look like if we're successful. And you've got now finance authorities like the Alberta Indigenous Opportunities Corporation. There's a similar one like that in BC, in Saskatchewan, federally. So a lot happening to make this happen. And when you get right down to it, though, I would say the number one thing is it is about realizing the rights, what it means to have rights, and also being respected. I think for in a lot of ways, it's almost more important to feel respect for one another that First Nations are talking about when I travel around.
So what do you feel? How do you feel about the Declaration of Rights of Indigenous Peoples Act, which is really the background of the controversy, at least part of the controversy over Bill 15, the First Nations Leadership Council saying they'll litigate against it if it passes. Has it been a gain, generally speaking, for the economy, or negative? Do you have a view on it?
That's a really good question, Geoff, and it's almost too early to tell. I've been an optimist on it. I think when it was passed in November of 2019, got its royal assent, one of the things we wanted to do right away was figure out what it meant, and that's why we had this conference in Vancouver, and we began to hear that it had a lot of opportunity attached to it, and economic reconciliation became a term that began to pick up steam, and it's still, I think, very much a descriptive term. When we got into the legislation, what did it mean? It was a rather skinny piece of text in terms of what it's meant, but it was profound in that it affected everything. And I don't believe we have seen everything that's going to affect yet. So that's why I think it's a little early to say. But I do think it has engendered a recognition and respect for the processes, whether or not we have some difficult implementations, like with the Land Act. I think that's a case in point where, okay, now let's go change that. Oh, wait a minute, right? So we don't want to see that happen again because it could create further political frictions. So I think if there's a kind of a steady implementation of it, there's a commitment to show the result as the result appears and be transparent about it. And also, I guess, have a public transparency, have good dialogue around it, so everyone knows what page we're on. And I think that was missing. We were moving too fast for the last couple of years. So let's put on the brakes a bit, not necessarily in the speed to results, but in the way that it's being understood.
Mm-hmm.
Stewart, you had a long career in journalism, and you've through the course of your career have seen the media landscape change dramatically. Probably when you started your career, you wrote on the street corner hawking newspapers, I'm sure. But
Actually was.
There you go. See, I called it. Read all about it. But now, obviously, the fragmentation of media is made for quite different landscape. So, what does that mean for having these discussions on on resource issues and resource conflicts. When environmentalists take on a project or there's differing views. It's different than it was 20, 30 years ago, how these played out. Well, how do you see them playing out now, and good or
Yeah,
bad, or
it's unsettled. I think
yeah,
it's not good. It's further exacerbated by the fact that Facebook is not a place where news gets shared in Canada
right,
at the moment, or at least news brand content. And then you've got pretty much every week that goes by, there's some legacy outlet that has closed its doors, and there are fewer journalists working. So that's not a good thing. But on the other hand, I think what we're doing at ResourceWorks is an example of a trend as well, where we have said, well, we have some work to do here. We need to get journalists working for us. We recently invited Nelson Bennett, who left BIV, he retired, to come in and do a column for us. So he's just starting that this week, and we're really pleased about it. We had a great reception. So he'll be looking at issues. But for every Nelson Bennett in the field, there's a whole newsroom closing, and
yeah.
it feels like it's going to get worse before it gets better. But we do need this. People want long form journalism. They want news they can trust. So it is a crisis.
Well, Nelson was a very effective beat reporter for BIV, just in this way the Sun used to have a forestry reporter, a mining reporter, environment reporter, First Nations reporter, and they don't have that anymore. So, like, are people just gonna have to go curate their own content? Is that what we all have to
Yeah.
do? I guess we're doing it now already.
Well, the complexity of these issues. We had two forestry reporters. We had
Mm.
one who covered more of the softwood and the technical stuff. We had one who was out on the kind of business side of it.
Gordon Hamilton,
On
or
my
yeah,
watch, we got the first energy reporter, because in the early 2000s we were starting to see the growth of the Northeast BC and what's going on up
mm,
there. It was this bonanza for revenues. You think of the stadium and bridges. It was just $8 per mega whatever is what the gas was fetching. Became a fraction of that after the U.S. discovered it had shale gas. But there was that period in the first decade when we needed to understand it. So we got a reporter, Scott Simpson, and he went to
uh-huh.
report on that. We had great mining coverage. We had a couple of mining reporters. Yeah, that was the economy. People think it's disappeared from our view because we don't have so much coverage of it. Well, it's disappeared from our view in part because we don't have the reporters and
Reporters to
columnists
cover
on
it.
it. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
When related to that, Stuart, I'm wondering, what do you think is going to be the impact of, as we shift away from legacy media into more social media? There's the geographical footprint of the information we consume is kind of almost lost, right? Depends to
Mhm.
varying degrees, right? But we consume this stuff that sort of transcends international borders, even sometimes even languages, and lose a lot of the stuff that is local. And so I'm wondering, like, what you think that's going to mean towards how people relate to the issues that are still in their backyard. They're just not part of the conversation they're having in the same way.
Yeah. Well, it's funny when you poll people on who they trust. They trust their neighbors. They trust their kid at the kitchen table. They trust people they relate to every day more than they do institutional heads or leaders or lawyers. Um, and I think we'll probably see more of that. So the news you get from the people you see every day will become probably more important because you're not seeing news from other sources. And then we have the additional factor of AI and what that means to how information is polished and presented, and is it real? Is it not real? Gosh, we haven't even started to process what all that means, but it does point back to the need. You look at niche publications with Ottawa coverage. I think of Blacklock's Reporter. I've been subscribing to that for years. They're the only outlet that covers all the interesting committees, and they come back with
Mm,
a fascinating batch of stories every day, every week. If they weren't doing that, the wire services wouldn't be doing it. The major newspapers wouldn't be doing it. They're covering, the headline story that the kind of herd of reporters is covering at Parliament. And we've kind of lost that to a great extent. I know that there's one particular journalist who in BC almost is, they named the legislation after him because he was the one using it for FOIs the most, like almost to a degree that no
He
one
who
would
shall not
believe.
be named.
And I mean, that's great. That's what we should have. We should have more diggers out there trying to figure what's going on, because there's all these great stories that we're not hearing about. So unfortunately, I think back, one of the big stories, one of the big headline stories I'll never forget of the years at the Vancouver Sun was the BC Rail thing, and boy, that was just a digging story, and it was fascinating to see. So if something like that came up now, like, who would be able to just pull 5 reporters off other beats and set up essentially a war room and cover that story the way that things like that were? I don't know how you do it, because you don't even have the bodies anymore.
Well, Stuart, it may be unfair, but I've had the perception that over the years, your organization has helped in the debate around resource stuff by putting in a third view, if you like, between which could not be put forward directly by proponents or by oil companies or forest companies, that tries to highlight the impacts of the resource sector and the views of community people. Is that fair? I mean, I see you in that space, so maybe I'm overreading it, but I think that's the case.
No, we from the outset, we wanted to bring in labor voices, and we did that. We wanted to bring in First Nations. We did that. We worked with rural communities. I mean, the phrase rural urban divide is one repeated constantly, at least in politics and business circles in BC, because it's real and it's not solving itself. So I think we've seen ourselves. So when it comes to, say, industry sticking up for industry, well, they're pretty good at doing that themselves. Companies are big boys and girls. They can do that. They usually have associations. They can do the lobbying. They don't need more of that. But when you look at who is the biggest beneficiary when those companies are successful, it's not actually the companies. It's the governments that collect royalties and taxes and redistribute those to citizens. So this is really a public issue of the efficiency and the success of having a thriving sector, because it's our, even though it's changed a lot and it's gotten, it outweighed in some measurements by other more urban industries, it's still a very large driver of the first dollar into the economy, and without it, we'd be in trouble. So I do see this as a project that is about identifying what communities need and working for their interest. And we're just finishing off a report on the northeast of BC, and it's recognizing that that's a part of the province that over contributes or disproportionately causes benefits for others, and no one ever thinks about it. So we've said, hey, let's take a look at it. Let's think about it and talk about it. So we're initiating that, issuing it in a couple of weeks.
Good.
Stewart, I'm going to start a Hotel Pacifico tradition right now, this second. Tell our listeners one Substack or information source that you would recommend that they check out.
Well, there's a Substack that I never miss. It's called Duneberg. I actually had Duneberg come on to my own podcast, Power Struggle, a few months ago. Duneberg is the #1 finance Substack in the world, and it is it's a pseudonym, obviously. We don't know what the person's actual name is, but it's 2 individuals who do this. There's an editor, and then the voice of Duneberg on the Duneberg podcast, who's also the pen, someone who's got a strong background in financial analysis, mainly interested in energy, but the geopolitics and politics of energy, absolutely fascinating. It doesn't come cheap. It's about the same if you subscribe to the Wall Street Journal or something. You have to, be prepared to pay for it, but I never miss it. It comes out every week.
Is it Canadian financial news, or is it
well,
global
Duneberg,
US? Yeah.
It is global, but Duneberg often writes about Canadian news, and in fact is from Canada. But it lives in the US in some mysterious location. There's a lot of mystique around Duneberg.
Okay, cool.
Okay, let's maybe, Kate, if you subscribe to it and share the password to Geoff and I.
We can split it 3 ways. Maybe we can afford it with our podcast proceeds. We'll see what we can do. There we
go. That's where the ad money goes, folks.
All right. Well, Stewart, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Hey, what's the purpose of an energy utility anyways? Well, the more than 2,700 employees at Fortis BC know what it is, because it's their collective responsibility to provide Fortis BC's customers the affordable, reliable, and safe energy they depend upon. And as we enter wildfire season in BC, that's what I want to talk to you about today: safety. As we adapt to increasingly intense summer heat and high winds, too many British Columbians have lived through the devastating impacts of wildfires. I was just visiting friends in Lytton last week and saw again the devastating impact of the 2021 wildfire on their village. And for the team at Fortis BC, dealing with wildfires is personal. With hundreds of employees across the southern interior, they're not just providing these communities energy, they're also a part of them. Many Fortis BC staff involved in the 2023 West Kelowna wildfire response were personally affected. More frequent extreme weather poses new challenges, and utilities like Fortis BC are evolving their wildfire mitigation practices to respond. That's where the Public Safety Power Shutoff, PSPS, program can be an option. Fortis BC delivers electricity in the southern interior, and we know that electricity infrastructure can be a source of wildfire ignitions, like when debris is blown into a power line during a windstorm. At a time where a single spark can lead to catastrophic consequences, shutting down those power lines could make all the difference in the most extreme conditions. The option of proactively and temporarily shutting off power is a last resort. Fortis BC anticipates that this tool will be used rarely and only in exceptional circumstances, but recognizes the importance of having a well-defined plan in place well before an emergency situation. These decisions will be guided by industry expert data, wildfire index, weather forecasting, and real-time updates from Fortis BC crews in the field. While a public safety power shutoff is a new tool for Fortis BC, it has become increasingly common for electricity providers across North America, including in Washington State and Alberta. While the circumstances of each region are unique, the goal is a common one: to reduce the risk of wildfires. Remember, that's the purpose of Fortis BC, providing affordable, reliable, and safe energy to the communities they serve. Nobody wants to be without power. So pending the review of the PSPS policy by the BC Utilities Commission, Fortis BC is continuing to openly engage their customers, stakeholders, and the public to ensure a balanced approach that prioritizes wildfire prevention and minimizes disruptions. For more information on wildfire safety practices, visit fortisbc.com/wildfire safety. Fortis BC, energy for a better BC and a better podcast.
One thing I want to clear the air on after that discussion with Stewart, I'm just curious, do we know what hewing is? Because I just thought it was like shaping wood.
Cutting, yeah.
Yeah.
Or using
The
an axe.
hewers of wood.
Like when you make a canoe, you have to hew the wood to like
Mhm.
curve and shape into the canoe.
The phrase
Shaper.
hewers of wood and drawers of water comes from the Bible.
No, it tracks.
But it was one of Geoff's favorite authors, Harold Innes, who used it in his 1930 book, The Fur Trade in Canada, to describe our traditional economic dependence on resource production. Boom.
Yeah.
Google wins.
Jesus was a carpenter, though, not a hewer. We're the hewers.
Well, what do they use? What do carpenters use? Wood. There you go.
So that's like in the Venn diagram. Okay, let's come back to
Jesus was one of the original
Hewers?
advocates for a strong forest industry.
Oh,
He
man,
probably
I'm
was
sorry.
using old growth too, folks.
Oh God, sorry, I took us down a rabbit hole. Out of the rabbit hole.
Ancient Lebanese
Well,
cedars for sure.
Yes,
Yes,
absolutely.
yes.
Fine grain,
right.
probably making guitars out of them or something.
Yeah. I want to get out of this rabbit hole and go into a different one because the king landed in Canada today and delivered a speech. The true north is strong and free. Do we need to go down any kind of rabbit hole? Actually, I mean, let me just say,
I'd like Geoff to sing "God Save the King."
in a
God
minute,
save the king. Not going to
he's
do
not.
that.
He's not like okay.
I can't sing it. I don't believe it.
Okay, well, Geoff.
My word.
Well, Geoff would be in good
Mercy.
company in parts of this country, right?
Yeah.
Polera has some interesting data
Oh.
on how popular the king is and isn't across Canada.
What was the share that said don't know when asked if there was a king? You know, I think a lot of people are oblivious to the fact.
Okay.
Oh,
Let's
anyway.
summarize.
Come now. They just haven't heard about the Queen passing away, that's all.
She's
She's still on our money. I mean,
They're
people
not reading
ought
traditional media.
people could be confused. Just the media landscape is fragmented, Geoff.
It hasn't
Weren't
been
you paying
covered.
attention?
I think Mark Carney's still on some of our money too.
Well, he's
Some
the
of
real king.
Old
He's
bills
the-
floating around. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, since you asked, Kate,
Mhm.
the king, I listened to the throne speech this morning, and I actually thought I thought it was kind of interesting symbolically, more than I was
Yeah,
expecting, because it was
yeah.
like, when he had a few of his little statements in there about how many times he visited Canada and his mother and everything like that. And I'm thinking like, oh, it really is the king doing this thing. And I think a lot of this is the high level language about Canada and sovereignty, and I think all that stuff was good. Where I thought it was a little bit funny was where then he talks about how Canadian households are going to save like $80 on taxes and stuff like that. I thought like they could have maybe stripped out some of the
Some of that.
usual
Maybe he's not the
boilerplate out of it.
messenger on
Maybe
that
they
one.
should have
Yeah.
just kept it
Yeah,
up here and
Fair.
stay high, not but they had to throw a few little things in there. But anyways, I think it was on balance a clever move by the Liberals to
Yeah.
bring him out. I think it got a lot of attention. I mean,
Exactly.
you don't usually
Exactly.
see all the national broadcasts going live for a throne speech.
And they
Yeah.
were absolutely gaga. Like the
They were.
CBC was just gaga. There was nothing that could possibly be said against any of it. So I agree with you on that point. It certainly got a
The
lot of
CBC
attention.
interrupted their usually critical coverage of the Liberals to be positive.
To go gaga.
To be positive.
I wouldn't go that far. I wouldn't go that far. But
Well-
the pledges that Carney is making are so far-reaching that I find it. I think I mentioned this before, like reshaping the entire security and economic relationship between Canada and the United States. That's the work of quite a long time, not the next 2 years. So it'll be very interesting to see how this session unfolds. It will be the one economy thing. I'm just going to raise this flag. He is telling the premiers basically, I'm going to bring in a bill, if you read it just the way it says on the paper, that will effectively merge the economies and eliminate these interprovincial trade arrangements, many of which are cherished by stakeholders in each of those jurisdictions. There is sort of a 13 economy attitude among the premiers and first ministers, and not a one economy one, especially on the part of Quebec. So it'll be very interesting to see what's in this next bill about intergovernmental affairs and many other things he's going to do.
And he said by July 2nd or something like that.
Yeah, Canada Day. Yeah.
Yeah.
Did he by July 2nd?
Or July 1st.
Okay.
Or,
I mean, suddenly David Eby's going to look like decaf.
So expectations are going sky high with Carney on some issues, particularly we talked about it with Stewart on energy. And, Tim Hodgson's speech to the Calgary Chamber last Friday was kind of a seminal event in terms of what he said, the language he used compared to 10 years of Justin Trudeau government. So if they don't deliver, then they got a problem.
Yeah, I agree. And also the budget commitment, which is not also not new but to say that you're going to get to balance in 3 years, given the direction that we thought things were going in December, is really a dramatic statement. Promising at the same time not to reduce
balance on operating.
Yeah, but still, I mean, it's a big job, and he's promising not to reduce transfers to the provinces or to individuals. So anyway,
if I heard this correctly, Geoff, maybe you can. I think it's been about 9% annual growth in spending federally, and he wants to get it down to 2%.
Yeah.
And that's without, as you say, cutting transfers to provinces, probably freezing them. But that's going to be painful.
Very painful. It's the similar problem that's being faced here in BC by the NDP government, which is saying it's not going to cut public services, but it is going to start to turn down that curve so that we have a lower debt to GDP ratio. Not a simple task.
And they're going to boost, though, defense spending.
Yeah, to 5%.
Significantly.
Yeah. Well, they're joining the EU, and the statement today in Europe was that they were going to try to raise spending to about 5%, which is like 2 years ago.
They're not even close to 2 right now.
Well, we're at 1.37. I looked it up. Yeah, we're being woodshedded for not being close to 2, but now we're going to jump to 5. And Carney has said that military spending is going to be a significant pressure in the budget.
Well, there's another shoe to drop. Yeah.
Well, it will be interesting times because even if Carney has the resolve to do it, boy, there's a lot of MPs that got elected as Liberals that probably didn't bargain for what's about to happen if
Also small margins.
the pink
Yeah.
slips start flying.
Yeah. Yeah. Tough work for the front bench. And we talked a bit about Gregor Robertson already, having to stand up a brand new Crown Corporation and develop hundreds of thousands of affordable homes. These are not small tasks. The World War II references are apt, I think, in terms of the scope of the changes he's talking about.
So Gregor's got pretty good real estate. Speaking of housing, he's got a seat in the front row, 5 chairs down from the Prime Minister.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Good for him.
He says, so look, I can just imagine the conversation. Look, I'm from Vancouver. We're used to expensive real estate here. I need that seat right there between the Prime Minister and the Speaker. That's waterfront, folks.
Yeah,
Prime Minister front.
Dramatic step up.
All right. But just to wrap this conversation up, I want to ask the question, do either of you think, like, out of today, like, so I think we're all three agreed that, the King's visit was a success in the sense that certainly we're talking about this thing we wouldn't have otherwise been talking about, this throne speech, but are Canadians going to be aware of anything that was said? Anything that Carney's right?
I think they will hear we're going to really push hard to get stuff done, and I think that's politically popular. And they're going to hear about it partly because people with legitimate concerns about that approach, maybe they're First Nations, maybe they're environmental, maybe they're lower levels of government, are going to be saying, we're worried about this. This is what Eby is facing with Bill 15, is that, very, very strong opposition, but the opposition may be highlighting what's actually a popular initiative in a lot of the voter base. I don't know if you've seen anything here from BC, Mike. I haven't, but that's my speculation. So I think it's been great for Carney since the election. I think he's done a good job of getting out and meeting people, causing things to happen, apparently being in control in spite of some of the glitches we were talking about last week with small gaffes and things like that. But the rubber is really going to hit the road now with some of the legislation and then the fall budget.
Well, and I think it is a success and the King's visit, but the other message I think that's being transmitted is that I think it won't be lost on a lot of Canadians that this was a direct reaction to Donald Trump.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
And that was the new Prime Minister flexing his muscle to defend Canada, so to speak. And you know who really likes the Royals is Conservative voters, traditionally.
Mm-hmm.
Is that okay? Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, traditionally, let's use Stephen Harper's term, old stock Canadians tend to be more supportive of the Royals. So, I mean, from that perspective, Liberals probably
makes some sense.
Got some positive vibes to some conservative on the conservative side there. So
one of the fun facts I learned out of all this was that Mark Carney's brother works for one of the offices. Is it Buckingham Palace? Which one is it? One of the one of the royal offices. I can't remember which one now. I'm forgetting already. But yeah, he has a strong, like aside from it's probably less, or I don't know, who knows, but it's his previous career, but also his own brother is right in there running one of the royal offices. So, or one of the offices of the royal household.
Look at his guest list, or meeting list includes Macron, Keir Starmer, the joint statement that came with France and Starmer later. He met with Trump. He met with the Pope. He met with the King. Not too much left undone.
Mike Myers, not to be missed. All right.
Do you think he'll come on the podcast, Mike, if we asked him yet?
The Prime Minister?
No, the Prime Minister, yeah.
Let's put it out right now. Prime Minister Mark Carney, we would like to invite you onto the Hotel Pacifico podcast.
Come on, sir. The pillow mints are fantastic.
Heer Polyev, we would like to invite you on the Hotel Pacifico podcast.
Absolutely.
Don Davies, you've been here. You can come back with
it. Another blow to poor Don.
He can come back, though. He can come back.
Yeah. He can come back. Yeah. All right. Well, just while we're on this topic, let's stay with Bill 15 for a minute, because I'm curious, just to say, some of this energy, I don't want to overemphasize the parallel, but some of this Mark Carney energy reminds me a bit of an early David Eby, this huge get shit done push. I'm going to push through legislation that's going to do stuff. And I think it's hard not to draw parallels right now between what the feds are trying to do and what's going on with Bill 15 in particular, and all the opposition coming up with that. Now, in both cases, you have sort of a clear public mandate, move stuff along, go faster. But then when you get into it, a lot of people go, well, not without talking to me first. So is there something, Geoff, for the federal government to be watching and how Bill 15 is playing out, and maybe some lessons there that they can take?
Well, for sure, they should check in with a lot of key stakeholders first, because David Eby now has to this week put his foot down and insist that Bill 15, which is intended to get things done, pass rather than wait till the fall, which is what his critics are hoping. You cannot
Oh, the irony.
slow down on a bill that's intended to speed things up so that you can consult with people who he's conceded he really should have spent more time with to begin with. The second thing is, I think it's critical. I see the government saying a lot that British Columbians are fed up with the delays in getting schools and hospitals. But the original discussion was about economic development. And generally speaking, people think that the government's in charge of getting schools and hospitals done, and it's both the regulator and the proponent. So there should be no problem speeding it up if the government wishes to. The last point I would make is that the Premier held a very big news conference yesterday. A lot of people were invited. Fortunately, the sun came out just before he was scheduled to speak. It had been pouring rain most of the morning. But it included a lot of Indigenous leaders from the Northwest and a lot of people in the mining sector. And the Premier was repeating his very loud economic message that BC is poised with the development of critical minerals to become the economic engine of Canada, all of Canada, with the quick approval of these mines. And so the challenge for the government now is to get one of the mines approved. There's been quite a bit of discussion about it, but I think execution is going to be the entire story from here on in. Nobody, and this will go for the federal government too, don't tell us what you're going to do, just get it done.
Mike, anything to add to that? More lessons?
Yeah, I think, I know they put a lot of effort into that announcement yesterday. I'm not sure whether the amount of payback they got in media coverage was commensurate with the effort they put into it. Because you can announce these things as much as you want, and I've learned this through the LNG issue, it's that you still rely on others to do their thing too, invest the money, move the project forward, navigate through the process. So sure, if government can remove some of those hurdles to get companies to a positive place and get stakeholders and First Nations to a positive place, great. That's what they should do. But it's not just like snapping your fingers and making it happen. It takes a lot of hard work.
But Mike, you made a point a number of shows ago, which I think bears repeating, which is that, and Eby's very careful now to have Indigenous leadership with him endorsing what he's saying right there on the spot. But there still will be consultation processes, and with Indigenous consultation, it takes as long as it takes, to quote you, and the government has found that out with this bill, where we see Grand Chief Stewart Phillip threatening to litigate and admitting he's having some tense conversations with his partner Joan Phillips, who's an MLA in the Eby government. So yeah, you were right on the money there, and I'm afraid that'll continue to be one of the realities the government has to wrestle with.
Well, that's and I don't think business has a problem with that, with the First Nations piece, because they can go and talk to the First Nations and set that up in advance, or do, things are getting codified a bit now in terms of what the expectations are, right? But it's government's got to do its part in responding nimbly to all the regulatory pieces that go into it. So I think, everyone gets the problem. Let's see how it all plays out.
All right. One more thing I want to pick up on. This is a conversation we've come back to a few times, and it's now been joined. Former BC Premier Mike Harcourt has now joined the conversation about the prospect of amalgamation for Metro Vancouver. In fact, he's come out as officially pro. I want to pull a quick quote from him in the Vancouver Sun saying, quote, the mayors would like to lose the mayors that would lose their positions wouldn't like it, and the police chiefs wouldn't like it, but it would save money and give you better governance. You would still have a sense of community. Coquitlam would still be Coquitlam. So I don't know, no notes there, actually. It's kind of, but what does it mean that we're at a stage now where a former BC premier, and then he was a Vancouver mayor for, I can't remember how many terms, 3?
So, well,
he was
for about 6 years. Yeah.
Okay.
He was a city councillor.
Okay.
Yeah.
So to have him say this, maybe there's some merit to it.
Well, I think it's a growing conversation about, well, first of all, the report came out last week for the regional district about issues at how it's managed. Now, I thought it was a bit weird that the Deloitte advisor said that the chair of the regional district should be an appointed person, not an elected person. I thought mixing elected and appointed doesn't seem like a good idea to me. But leaving that aside, there's an issue with how regional governance is happening, and 41 people on a board does seem like a lot.
Yeah.
Now, they can restructure the regional board without touching municipalities. That's one option they have. But do we have the right number of municipalities? And I think Premier Harcourt, was raising a valid point. I actually heard him on CBC Radio this morning talking to it. And I hear this a lot, put Langley together, put Maple Ridge and Pimentos together, put the North Vancouvers together. And before I even get to the end of the sentence, some mayor will be standing up saying, but no, this is why we can't
We're
do
not
it.
the same. Yeah.
But I think it's a very valid referendum question. And, I think we talked about this some number of pods back about Saanich and Victoria went through I think we talked about with Gordon Campbell, citizens assembly process in Saanich and Victoria to reach the conclusion that they should go together. And, even that would be an improvement to have an actual discussion where people weighed in on it. But it just feels, like the system doesn't really want to change,
No,
So
it's always come from above. In Ontario it did, in Montreal it did.
yeah, it has to.
You
Yeah.
can't ask municipalities to commit suicide politically. But at some point right now, like the bailouts that are being required by municipal levels of government, whether it's the huge injections of money for transit or the big subsidy that was required to convert to the Surrey Police Service, or whatever is going to be done to fix the water plant, these are all things that are really now beyond the governance scope of the municipalities and beyond their fiscal capacity. So somebody's got to step in and make sense of it. When
I
I was
think
in
it's a
Toronto,
political winner or a political loser,
it's
Jeff.
a dead loser. That's why I
for the
only raised it
province.
after I was out of politics, and that's why that's why Mike is doing it now too.
No, but I was
somebody's
yeah, but I was thinking about this, Jeff. Like, tell me what you think. But because I was reflecting on like so many of those amalgamations are so far in the past, and kind of thinking like you this instinct that you just couldn't do it now. But there is sort of a parallel in what Doug Ford did in 2018 in Toronto, where there were like 44 city councilors and he cut them down to 25, and everyone was like, oh my God, what's he doing? And like nothing. It was a political nothing burger.
it wouldn't have been if it had been raised by a municipal level politician. That's what I say. Somebody of Ford's determination and political clout has just to come in and render rough justice. And it was a huge crisis in Quebec. I think it was Jean Charest was the premier. He wasn't able to completely finish the job. Ford was successful in Toronto. Calgary's just one. Winnipeg's just a big city. Edmonton, as far as I understand, it's just a big city. And there's just today in the paper, Anmore, population, whatever it is, a few thousand, really upset because their population could double over 25 years due to one big project. Imagine a tiny community like that trying to do the assessments on a multi-billion-dollar 25-year project. Very, very difficult. So I think that it's coming to a head, but I don't see an early opportunity for someone to take it on because it's so difficult.
This could get you back into politics, Jeff. I feel
well,
Yeah.
Metro is unable to function.
Yeah.
Right. And so that may force the issue.
I just want to note the Frank Leonard plan in Saanich. Former Mayor of Saanich, I believe, brought in a requirement that when people vote at municipal election, they also elect their regional board directors. So it's concurrent. You have to be elected onto a council to be on the regional board, but there's an internal competition within those candidates to be on the regional board. So I think that's a nice incremental solution that would increase accountability.
What about eliminating school boards, Mike? Do you want to go there?
Yeah, let's do it. Let's do it.
Well, but I mean, but that does raise like that also, like if we amalgamate Greater Vancouver, there should be amalgamations within the school boards too.
Here's what I would do, Kate. I would do an amalgamation of municipalities to like 8 or 9 in the Lower Mainland.
Yeah.
And then I would put the school boards into the municipalities.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
I don't know if I put them into, but I'd say the
I would
lines.
I would have one works yard, one physical plant, make the school board appointed by the council.
What one business license for the region? Yeah,
that's all right. One window. One window.
that's right.
Okay. Okay.
A drive-through
All
window
right.
or a cycle through.
Right.
No
Do
problem.
we have time for clipping of the week, Kate?
Yeah, we got to do clipping of the week. Sorry, I love this discussion, but I'm sure we'll have more chance for it. Because I'm glad to bring this clipping up. So our clipping this week is from, as I mentioned earlier, Nancy McDonald in the Globe and Mail, and it's her piece on, I believe it's called Pandora's Block, about a block in Victoria. And I'll start off with just saying what sort of stood out for me for this piece, and I'll pass it both to you. But the clipping this week is fascinating because how often do you open the newspaper or you go online or whatever, and you see some story about how the opioid crisis is hurting communities, and it can feel same. And this one is completely unusual. And I have to say, some of the people that Nancy McDonald spoke to were really people who were really invested in finding solutions for their neighbors, who were often staying in the neighborhood because they really cared about the place where they were and the people who were in it. They weren't trying to it wasn't NIMBYism by any stretch. They were sort of anti-NIMBYist, but they were struggling. They were struggling to operate their churches. They were struggling to operate their businesses. And they were saying something has to change. It was one of the most nuanced portraits of a block affected by the opioid crisis that I have ever read. And I really enjoyed it.
Nancy McDonald's done some really phenomenal reporting in the last couple of years. I know she did some great stuff on the wildfires, but this one in particular as well with her editor, Wendy Cox, I think I wasn't really aware of the story until I was walking through the lobby of my building and peeked at my neighbor's Globe and Mail, a hard copy, and it was like front page, full length front page, which I said, whoa, I better read this online. And there were, someone in Victoria said like, well, this isn't news to us. And I suppose not, but it's still, these are stories that should be told. And I thought there were some nuggets in there. Just the issue with the unhousability of some of this population.
That was a very key point. Yeah.
This is not a problem that BC Housing can solve. With some, yes, but not everybody.
Yeah.
So what are we going to do about that? And the other one is, it was also touched on in the article, and I heard this at Jess Ketchum's Safe Streets Forum a few months ago too. Is the brain damage being done with multiple overdoses, and what we're having a cohort of people that are going to need long-term care, and they're on the street and they need help, and these are issues we haven't fully grappled with yet.
I agree with all that. I thought it was, on your point, Mike, very important that the police officer said these people are unhousable. Even if the bars just don't beat up the building manager or start fires, that's a bar too high for some folks who've been through this for so long. When I was in Victoria during the pandemic working in the Horgan government, that whole Pandora operation was shut down by everybody being moved into housing. I think it's happened at least twice, and it's back as big as ever. In fact, probably more destructive than ever. And I came away too thinking that, good work to the Globe and Mail for this series, which has been going on for a long time. But what's been missing is a coherent government-wide approach that would include policing, first responders, housing people, and others trying to work through the strategies necessary. Because it would be a tragedy, for example, if the Baptist congregation there, which is in the big church right on the corner, packed up and moved to the suburbs, which is what they're threatening to do, a historic church in downtown Victoria, which is very sympathetic to the plight of the homeless, unable to function basically because of what's happening on the street. So, a great piece and a lot of lessons in it. We're just about 10 years into this emergency, by the way. That's 2016 it was declared.
Yeah. I mean, that's a bold statement, though, like to say these people are unhousable, because it raises a question, then what?
Well, that's where the involuntary care thing comes in.
Yeah.
We have the health minister announced today, or yesterday, I guess, thousands of people who have been committed but are on leave, basically, which was the case in the Lapu tragedy too. That gentleman had been committed twice, according to news reports, the one who's accused, and was out on leave. So these are very complicated issues, and I don't think the government's found its way to talk about how to talk about it yet.
We have, I think most people know this, but we have involuntary care today.
Yeah. a lot of it.
I mean, there's a lot of it. There's mental health wards and locked wards and so forth. So it's not like we're starting to do something new. It's maybe the nature of it may have to change.
Well, what's the nuance there? Like, so the circumstances for which you can end up
Well,
involuntarily. Yeah.
I'm really out of my depth here, but my perception is that we're not using involuntary care for hardcore addicts who are on the street, who are, not a danger to others, but maybe a danger to themselves, right?
Mm.
And they may be a danger to others eventually, but I don't think that's the issue. I think the issue is the danger to themselves. And at least that's my view. And they're dying. The death rates show it.
Yeah. Well, and the other thing is just related to that involuntary care thing. I think some of where we might be slower to apply it in the case of drug use is this sort of, what am I going to say, dated notion that drug use is a choice, right? There's a change in thinking there that we're maybe catching up on.
Like, yeah, I actually think the public can distinguish between someone who's obviously smoking weed or even using some coke or even, frankly, heroin. Who knows, right? Like, there's a lot of hard drugs being used that are outside of the public eye, but fentanyl's a whole nother story.
Else.
Whole nother story.
Yeah, that was actually a pretty dramatic part of the story, though. Too, is they were describing how in 2013, like in the course of days, how that block changed with fentanyl. And I hadn't realized. I wonder if Geoff, you may know this too because you follow this so closely, but that BC had been sort of the test case in Canada for fentanyl.
It appears to be the case. And, we had a lot going for us in terms of being vulnerable to this. We had a pretty large population of people who did have substance dependencies. And that's a whole spectrum, of course, all the way from tobacco through to alcohol and much harder drugs, all the way to heroin. But in my own view, we had a very muscular and successful drug trading organization that had started with marijuana and did cocaine. So we already had a big criminal infrastructure because we were the source of BC bud and so forth, which was traded as a premium product to Mexico and all the way down the United States seaboard and so on. So we had everything, yes, the port and a bunch of other things, but a large market, significant marketing organization in place. And when fentanyl came, they were able to innovate very quickly and with devastating effect. And that's still going on. During the pandemic, and Pawnee Henry talked about this a bit, but I think it'd be great if the police talked about it more. We saw the fentanyl production move from offshore in China, where people were getting it mailed to them and so on, into labs and other production facilities here. And it's very interesting to see the argument over whether or not we export fentanyl. We have the capacity to export a ton of fentanyl, but we do not appear to be sending it to the United States, as the CBSA has said, and there's a lot of evidence to back that up. So a very big business selling fentanyl to people who wind up on Pandora. And so far, not a very strategic response anywhere, really, never mind just BC.
All right. So I'm going to wrap this up just with a call out to our guests. Like, go read this story. I guarantee you're going to find something new in it. It's a new take on this topic. Let's go grab a drink.
Okay, I'm going to raise a glass, toast today. I'm not grumpy. Congratulations to Royal Roads University for naming a new Langford building as the John Horgan campus. As his wife Ellie was there was a big gathering of people from the wider community. It was a very important investment because many people, especially working people who needed access to the Royal Roads curriculum and that kind of thing, were struggling with transit issues and all kinds of other obstacles to get into the campus itself. So this more urban setting has been something that John Horgan worked really hard at. He'd be delighted to see it opening like this, and I'm sure it'll be a great success. So congratulations to everybody who was involved in that project, which looked like a really happy crowd.
All right. Here. Mike.
I'm having trouble summoning outrage this week, so I guess I'll have to raise a glass. I used a lot of it.
That's okay,
on the,
Mike. That's okay.
That's
BC.
okay.
Last week I used it all up on the BC's place in cabinet, so I've got to recharge my outrage batteries. Please send your submissions, listeners, for anything I should be outraged about. So I will raise a glass to an outrage. The Senate again. Senator Duncan Wilson took his seat yesterday in the Senate of Ottawa, Canada, Senate of Canada in Ottawa, and one of Canada's newest senators. So raise a glass to Duncan. But here's the challenge. Senator Wilson, first of all, I'd like to know what you named your riding, because senators get to name their own riding or their district. So I don't know if he's like the senator for West End, Yaletown, whatever the name of his boat is or whatever. But I expect to hear Duncan Wilson's name in the news at least once in the next 6 months, or else, I will be very upset. So
Or else
I'd like to see
you'll send a strongly worded letter.
a glimmer of relevance of the Senate. I'm hoping Duncan will make the case.
Duncan will deliver.
There's a glimmer of relevance.
Oh, I hope he's listening.
Don't
Proposal
disappoint
for
me.
a national podcast support program funded by.
That's right. So
All right.
there you go.
All right. I like it. I like it. Yeah, we're a friendly bunch this week because I think I'm raising my glass too. And it's we kind of touched on it today, but I just wanted to raise my glass to a long married couple, Joan Phillip and Stewart Phillip. I'm really glad their marriage is faring well despite their divisions over Bill 15. But I have to say too, I just really appreciate. I think it was Stewart Phillip. I think it was the Grand Chief, and how he responded to the question of how their marriage was doing, and talking about we've had some tense conversations in the living room, but we've been through worse. That was beautiful.
No, he said, we've both been thrown in jail for standing up for Indigenous rights, so I think we'll survive this one.
I like it. I like it.
That's a good line. Good line,
It
Stewart.
is. It is. And way to way to give us all a shake and get to the point. It's okay to agree on disagree on these things, people, even if you're married. So my glass is raised to them. All right, there's another one in the bag. I want to thank our guest, Stewart Muir, for checking in, and our presenting sponsor, Telus and Fortis BC. We will see you next week, guests. BC, you can never leave.